We are live and recording. Yay! Hello, happy Wednesday to everyone. We've got a good YA event in store for you guys tonight. So I'm very excited. We have Lori M. Lee, and she is going to be in conversation with Rena Barron. And for Lori, we are celebrated Broken Web, which is book 2 in the series. So yeah, you will not be getting a description from me because no spoilers here, though they will obviously be talking about the book and everything. And also, speaking of second books, for Rena, we had Reaper of Souls, which I have to say, I noticed this, your lipstick perfectly matches the red on your book cover. I was like, that is so, I just had to point it out because it's so beautiful. Okay, and just to give you guys a little intro on our amazing authors for tonight. Lori is the author of speculative novels and short stories. Her books include, I don't want to butcher the pronunciation. How do you say PAHUA?
PAHUA.
PAHUA? And the Soul Stealer. That's such a beautiful name. That's a gorgeous name. And then Forest of Souls and the sequel, Broken Web, which is what we are celebrating today, and more. She considers herself a unicorn fan. I would like to point everyone to the glorious unicorn behind her to note her fandom of them. And she enjoys marathoning TV shows and loves to write about magic, manipulation, and family. So all of the things we love at Mysterious Galaxy. And Rena grew up in a small town, Alabama, where stories of magic and adventure sparked her imagination. After penning her first awful poem in middle school, I feel you on that one, she graduated to writing short stories and novels by high school. Rena loves all things science fiction and fantasy, ghosts, and superheroes. When she's not writing, she can be found reading or brushing up on her French. She is the author of the young adult fantasy novels Kingdom of Souls. Maya and the Rising Dark is the first book in Rena's middle grade contemporary fantasy trilogy set in Chicago. So lots of amazing things. And that is pretty much all I'm going to say because you guys are here to listen to the authors. They're the amazing creative souls that I get to share with you guys today. So house rules before I pass it off. If you look to the right-hand side, we have our chat section. I see all of the hellos and the love. So all of the hellos and love back to you guys. Keep the discussion coming. If you look down below, you will see where it says ask a question. Indeed, as that does imply, that is where you can ask a question. I highly encourage you to take advantage of that. Events are fun because you get to interact with the authors and poke their brains and be like, so this random thing, do tell me, where did it come from? So make sure you ask a question. And then also, you may be wondering, how can I get more books? How can I read these amazing books? How can I support these authors? And I'm so happy you were asking, because if you look down below, there's the purchase book button, and that's where you can buy book 1, book 2, and the other books of these amazing series. So thank you so much for joining us, everyone, and I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Rena. I'll see y'all at the end of the event. Bye!
Thank you. Well, this is super exciting. Lori and I know each other from the Chicagoland area, so this is fun time to just kind of chat and celebrate her sequel. So go on.
Go.
I was gonna dive right into this book, Lori. Don't try to hold back because we know you did not hold back in the book whatsoever. I want to dive right in. I want to talk for those who, so we're not giving away spoilers, but for those who've read Forest, what can we expect at a very high level from Broken Web?
We can expect to see more of the world instead of remaining within, Saoirse's little pocket in the Deadwood. You get to go into the Empire now and see a lot more of the world, and so there's more traveling. And one of the things she's trying to figure out in this book is actually I can't answer that because that's a spoiler. but there's a lot more traveling in this book. And then more of war. Is that vague enough?
I think it's vague enough, but at the same time, it's very intriguing because we know kind of where you end at book 1, and there's just so much happening and so much going on that we know it's just going to be pretty exciting where it goes. When
I could do like a pitch of their first book.
Yeah, do a pitch of the first book.
Okay. So Forest of Souls is the first book in the series. That in the series in general is about this girl named Saoirse who is in training to become the next royal spy, and then she discovers that she is what is called a soul guide, which is a shaman with the ability to shepherd souls. So because of this, she gets tasked with destroying what's called the Dead Wood, which is an ancient forest possessed with vengeful spirits that is slowly devouring the kingdoms.
Which is super cool. And I think I was attracted to the fact that you and I both have souls in our titles for our first book. I didn't notice that.
What a coincidence.
Oops. So I like to even talk about kind of what attracted you to the world building and kind of this ideal of these souls and the Deadwood, because your world building is phenomenal. It's super unique. And I love to kind of have a little idea of where you kind of came up with the ideal.
Thank you for asking that and for saying that, because I actually I'm obsessed with the world building that you did as well in Kingdom of Souls. And I wanted to ask you like a really similar question, actually, like how you came up with the magic and like all the lore and the mythology in there. So we can circle back around, okay? So for Forest of Souls, the magic in there is loosely inspired by monk shamanism. Monk shamanism is strongly based in animism, which is the belief that everything has a spirit, and everything from the wind to the trees to the earth, and sometimes inanimate objects as well. Some believe in like a spirit, a stove spirit, a hearth spirit, or an altar spirit. These are like guardian spirits for the house. And also monk shamans, when they go into the spirit realm, they have the ability to call on animal familiars to like assist them in whatever ritual they're doing. So all those things I thought was super cool. And so the shamans in the world of Forest of Souls, they cannot access their magic without a familiar bond. So that was just very loosely inspired by that, but because I wanted it to be inspired by it, but I wanted it to be purely fantasy as well. I didn't want it to be too much of a one-to-one thing.
And I think that's one of those things with world building. When we often say that our world building is inspired by either our culture or something real world, we're still writers. We're still writing fiction. So I feel like a lot of times it's very loosely inspired, because we don't want to kind of put ourselves in a box where we are saying like it has to be exactly like something. I think that's a lot of pressure, right? Because you're trying to capture something that represents different things to different people. So I don't like to kind of closely use inspiration. I like to kind of take a little bit and build a lot from it. And so for me, with Kingdom of Souls and that whole series, it is loosely inspired by the Orisha, but that is just kind of the base of the inspiration. Like the whole world that I decided to build is more inspired by an ideal. And so when I first thought about the story, I started with this ideal is, what if there is this girl who is surrounded by magic and she can see magic, but she can't actually use or experience magic? And how that would actually impact kind of how she thinks about herself and her environment, her world. Like her parents have magic. She's from tribes that have magic, but then she kind of doesn't. So I wanted, so what kind of inspired me too is this whole ideal of being a part of a culture, but maybe having lost some of it for various reasons. In my case, having ancestors from West Africa, but having lost that because of American slavery, and not really knowing everything about it, but also seeing pieces of it in my childhood things like voodoo that was being practiced, like where I grew up, and kind of not really understanding that and seeing it as a bad thing because that's what we were taught. But then going back and kind of reteaching myself is like, oh, so this is demonized because it's not Christian or it's not American, and just taking those ideals and wrapping them in the story. And I think we all have a little piece of world building where we're taking part of ourselves and kind of building out from that and that imagination. And that's kind of where I started with Kingdom of Souls, and just kind of expanded from there, because again, like we said, it's like loosely based and loosely inspired, but then we want to kind of keep using our imaginations and take it in new directions. So world building is one thing, but you have some really specific shamanism in the book, soul guides being one. Can you talk a little bit more about that without giving away any spoilers?
What a soul guide is?
Yeah.
So specifically in this world, a soul guide is someone who can shepherd souls. So when someone dies, they have the ability to either guide that soul into the afterlife, or sometimes, if they're fortunate, to guide that soul back to life, back into the body. So, which is kind of what happens at the beginning of Forest of Souls. Saoirse is on a quest of sorts, and her best friend is with her, and they get ambushed. And her best friend dies in the crossfire. And the way that Saoirse discovers that she has this bizarre and unique power is that she brings her best friend back to life. So everyone assumes that she's a soul guide, but they haven't actually seen a soul guide in centuries. So they can only assume that that's what she is. And then she gets tasked with, this monumental job of destroying this massive dead wood, because she's the only person who can force these souls that are trapped inside the trees to rest in peace, to usher them into the afterlife.
Yeah, which is kind of scary. I'm just gonna go ahead and say it, because we're talking about people or souls. I don't know if lost souls is the right term, but they're kind of trapped in this place, right? In this deadwood. They're kind of in between. They're not at peace and they're not at rest. So it does kind of speak to this whole ideal of the afterlife and kind of what's beyond. Is that something that you thought about a little bit as you were kind of writing the story, and kind of what that meant, just kind of from your experience versus kind of how you see it in the story?
I'm gonna be honest, I didn't. because Saoirse didn't, because her main thing is she's driven by how do I say this? she's not concerned with the afterlife. She's much more like this life, she's very in the moment, and she's very she has these goals that she has to achieve, and she's she doesn't, the things that are happening right now in her life just matter so much more. She doesn't even give the afterlife much thought. And as for the deadwood, she also just assumed she would never have anything to do with it. So it's one of those things that has existed for so long that it's just a part of the landscape. And so that's not a part of her life. So she's never worried about it. She's never thought about it. And now she has to, of course, but not so much in the afterlife sort of way, but in a sense of this isn't a challenge that I have to overcome now. And these things, and in order for me to reach my goal, I have to get past this dead wood and destroy it. And, she's doesn't give too much thought about where these souls go, because she's just not a very spiritual person. And I think that's okay.
That's okay. That's absolutely okay. I mean, I think you know, we've got characters who are going to be more spiritual and some who are just going to be in the moment. And there's something that's really nice about kind of those in the moment characters, because I feel like they act with their hearts, and they're like, I'm trying to take care of my friends, my family. I'm trying to make sure that I can meet my goals. That's a very, you like, having that drive is really helpful for the plot and kind of keeping the story moving along really quickly. And I think we definitely see that in the series. I'm so fascinated with like the Deadwood. I'm just like, how does it shape everyone's feeling about everything? Because that, you know, when we think about world building, we're always thinking about that stuff. Like, how is that? So if you were to be outside of Circe's point of view, how does the Deadwood kind of shape this world that you've created, which is massive?
Thank you. So the Deadwood formed, like, I think I put it in the book, like, I don't know, almost 1,000 years ago. So it's been there for a very long time, and it began small. But the thing is that the trees move because they have souls inside them, controlling them. So the more people they kill, the larger the trees, or the, you know, possessed spirits grow.
Mm-hmm.
And so and also the trees very slowly move. So the trees and the forest and the Deadwood has been slowly growing for, you know, centuries, to the point where now it literally spreads across, like, from the top of the continent to the bottom of the continent. And Evelyn, which is the country that Saoirse lives in, it is almost completely cut off from the two other kingdoms on their continent. So they're like a coastal kingdom, but their coastal kingdom on the west and on the east, it's just like completely the Deadwood. So like, I think about these things, but this is not necessarily on paper. It's just that there's always been a conflict between the two other kingdoms. The two other kingdoms have been in a weird conflict, kind of like almost a Cold War, for centuries. There's like an unhappy peace between the three kingdoms that is being enforced by a man called Ronan, who the Spider King, who is the ruler of the Deadwood. It's his power that keeps the Deadwood from expanding even more quickly than it already does. So he keeps the kingdoms in a very tenuous peace. But even when they've had, it's a weird benefit to having the Deadwood there. Like, they're very cut off from the other kingdoms, but also at the same time they're protected because the other kingdoms are magical. There's the shamans who live in the Empire, and then the Shadow Blessed who live in another kingdom to the south. But even while they have a magical population, they're majority just normal people who don't have any sort of magic at all. So by virtue of being cut off by the other kingdoms,
Mm-hmm.
to the other kingdoms, they've basically remained safe for like all these centuries. So there's also this slight dilemma that Saoirse has, you know, where like she has to destroy the Deadwood because it's going to destroy everyone. But there's also war and like conflict and tension brewing between the kingdoms. And if she takes down the Deadwood, that leaves Evelyn completely exposed to like being invaded by any of the other kingdoms. So you know, I like layering those weird, those, like, you know, conflicts in that add more tension to like a character's decisions.
Yeah, I mean, you do it so well, because that's a huge kind of conflict to have to like debate. Like, the Deadwood protects my kingdom, but it's also dangerous.
it's it's like a danger to the kingdom, at the same time it's like a natural barrier.
yeah, which is a fun, again, good world building, because it's a fun twist, because then it just creates all that internal conflict. And I think that's something that you do really well in this series, have kind of that dualness that's happening. So I don't want to give away a whole lot. So I want to talk about kind of your process. When you kind of started out to writing the series, when you started with Forest of Souls, did you kind of foresee this as being multiple books, or did you kind of start with a story and it just kind of expand? What was kind of your process for how you developed this huge world?
I want to hear your answer on this too, actually. Okay. So when I was planning out Forest of Souls, I actually wrote Forest of Souls as a NaNoWriMo back in 2014. So I worked on it. Yeah, I've had this book in my head and on paper and like 10,000 different drafts for years. But when I was plotting it, I was super ambitious. I was just like, this book's going to do this. This book's is going to be about this. And I had like a 5-book series planned out. It's just ridiculous. And then, of course, in the actual writing of the book, you know, so much changed that everything that I had planned didn't even matter anymore. Like, I want to like throw a little cautionary thing out there. As I was world building the book, I put together this Bible of like, this is how, you know, the kingdoms are. These are their like exports. These are their major imports and exports. And like, this is, and as you were saying, how the Deadwood affects, you know, like the world at large, like, because there's no land route between the kingdoms. You know, trade is completely by sea. So the sea merchants have this like, you know, empire of like trade because they like, you know, they control all of that. And then, you know, I had all these things that would never make it to paper, but that would work, that I could like have in my head. And then, like I said, I started writing it and I was just like, this changed and this isn't relevant anymore. And I had spent so much time on this like huge document that was now completely useless. So don't do that. Don't do what I did. And just, you know, get everything to a point where you feel confident starting to write. You know, like for me at least, it helped me feel comfortable enough to like really jump into the world, even if everything changed. But I will not do it again.
Yeah, I really love the whole ideal of a world building Bible, which is really fun. But I agree, there's definitely a lot of stuff that ends up changing. I wrote Kingdom of Souls a really long time ago as well. So I've been sitting with this story. I can't even remember now. I feel like so old because I'm now working on book 3 in the series. So I don't remember. I originally wrote it. I'm probably 2013, somewhere around that time. So it was quite some time ago. It had a completely different name. The premise was a little bit different when I initially wrote it, but it was one of those things where I had queried it, and then I had to put it on the shelf because it didn't sell, like it didn't get an agent. So I kind of just left it alone and went and wrote something else. But it was one of those stories where I had a hard time letting it go. You know, it was like kind of percolating in the back of my mind. I kept kind of thinking about it. And so I decided, it took me some years to actually realize what was wrong with it. And it was one of those things where I had written it and I had edited it many times and like, no, I actually need to rewrite it from scratch. And I ended up kind of doing a bunch of world building, very similar to you, where I kind of thought about, okay, there's magic in this world. Who has magic? Who doesn't have magic? Similar to your kingdoms, there are like places where the tribal people have magic, but in the kingdom, there are very few people that have magic. So there's a divide there. I worked on kind of things like the political system of the kingdom and how that lay out, their trade, their food, all the fun things that we writers do to procrastinate that don't make it in the book necessarily. Just say, but we like it. But that being said, all of that stuff doesn't make it in the book, but it does always inform the story. And there are little pieces of it that kind of help shape the story. So as much as that it seems like, oh, we're doing so much like world building on the side, it does kind of matter to the larger structure of the story. It might go in very small ways, but it does. And so this whole ideal, even with Kingdom of Souls, was this whole ideal about kind of, I I really went heavy, Lori. So I decided that like I wanted to like think about what the gods were like in their history. And so I kind of came up with this ideal about there being this demon king who's trapped, his soul is trapped in a box. And this whole ideal that he's trapped in a box because he fell in love with a god. And that wasn't supposed to happen. And there's like revenge and all of that stuff. So then I had to really think about, well, how does that inform the world today, the world of the book? Demons are looked upon as bad people because of this. And, you know, there are these stories about demons eating your soul, which they do. I mean, I'm not going to pretend like they're great people. They do eat souls. I mean, my books are dark. But like
minor detail.
It's like a minor thing. I mean, there could be worse things you could do, maybe. I don't know. But in world building, you think kind of about how you kind of put all those pieces together and how they inform each other. So for me, probably the biggest challenge I had was that I had built up this huge mythology behind you know, Kingdom of Souls and this whole thing with the demon and him falling in love with a goddess and how that's, you know, impacting today's world. And he's trying to be free. And then we have this girl with no magic who's the only one who seems to believe that this demon king wants to be free. No one else cares because they think, well, no, the gods trapped him. He's not going to ever become free. So like just kind of going through this ideal. So one of the things that I did in the story was kind of do these interludes where I kind of just had the gods tell their story in pieces. And they're kind of talking to the audience, which is a little weird, maybe.
I loved that, actually. That was one of my favorite parts of the book. Like, I love those little interludes where, like, that are not part of the narrative, but that add so much to it, so much, like, context.
Yeah, it felt like the easiest way to add the dreaded backstory.
I think, yeah, I know that like some people might say that's like a shortcut, I guess, to like throwing in the backstory and stuff, but I love it. I think it's a great method to use, and I thought it worked really well.
And I do think that there are just certain books where, you know, we talk about like info dumps. So like, we don't want to do info dumps, but I do think there are certain books where the world building is larger than just being able to kind of walk through it, where you just have to kind of, for people to truly understand and grasp the scope of the world, especially when we're talking about series, right? Because book ones contain, but as you do book two and you do book three, you really continue to grow the world. So I'd like to know kind of like, how did you think about that when you were like, okay, time for book two, how do I grow this world? How do I keep it fresh? Because I think that's also like really challenging how you grow worlds from book one to two.
I agree. And again, I would like to hear your thoughts on this too. But with Forest of Souls, like I was saying, so much changed in the writing that I had to scrap everything I had initially planned for book two, which really sucked because I had, you know, a pretty decent outline for book two. And I felt confident about that. But then in the revision process, and like, I don't regret any of the changes that I made, like my editor's notes and everything that I had to change made the book so much better than it was. But again, the problem was that I had to scrap everything I had planned for book two. So it took me a really long time for my head to pull together the story that would be Broken Web, and actually the same thing happened for the third book. Mm-hmm. So, but yeah, so with the second book, I knew that she would have to go farther to like find the answers that she's looking for. And it's hard talking around a spoiler, but like the original, the very first draft of Forest of Souls, like way back in 2014, it had her all over the place. It had her, you know, in Evelyn, and then in Spinner's End in the Deadwood, and then in Miriam in the Empire, and then back again. And the problem was that certain characters like Ronan and like her best friend just they weren't on the page enough with her going so many places. So with Forest of Souls, I just kept her in the Deadwood because I wanted the Spinner's End and the Deadwood to be a stronger presence. I wanted to be like a character on its own, like and for the readers to really feel the threat of the Deadwood, which you wouldn't feel if she was barely there. So she's there and she experiences like, you know, firsthand the horror that what the Deadwood can do. So I thought that worked better for the first book. And so the second book, I took her out of that and I threw her into a completely new place again, which is Miriam in the Empire, which is the capital of the Empire. And she's there looking for answers. And as this lauded soul guide that, you know, everyone's looking to for the answer, for solutions that she doesn't know how to provide. So a lot of it is her searching for those answers, and in the midst of like trying to calm the rising tensions between each of the kingdoms, because like that sort of political thing, the war between the three kingdoms, that's also a constant threat that I wanted to like keep there. But at the same time, that's not her immediate concern. Like Saoirse is not a politician, and she's not a diplomat. She's not a politician. She's not someone with any particular training in that or like any interest. So she sort of just trusts the rulers of each respective kingdom to do what they need to do while she does what she needs to do. So I wanted that there, but I didn't want that to be her main concern, because sometimes, you know, the hero doesn't have to be the person who deals with all of that, because she's not a ruler. She's just, you know, just another girl.
One thing that we're learning from Lori tonight is super important and you need to take away. If you're planning a series, be prepared that if you've written out like outlines and drafts for book 2 and 3 and your editor hasn't seen it, you might have changes in book 1 that will completely change book 2 and beyond. And that's pretty common, which is something I think people should be prepared for. I actually never got around to doing book 2 before my editor got into book 1, because I had a feeling that things would change and the storyline changed significantly. So that is like a huge takeaway for folks who are listening who are also writers. Like I mean, you could do it, but most likely it's going to change. Lori, what you were talking about focusing in on the Deadwood in book 1 versus kind of expanding in book 2 kind of makes me think of this whole ideal of zooming, right? Kind of like you could either start your world building from this large lens and kind of narrow in, or you can kind of start from this narrow point and then widen the world. And I feel like with the series, that's what you've done. You kind of started from the really specific, very personal stakes for your main character, and then kind of widen the scope of the world, which I think is a fun way of doing it, because I think it helps ground people first before you kind of throw them into all the other things that are happening, which is a little bit. I feel like
that's what you did with your series too.
I was going to say a little bit. I think I kind of followed a similar path. In that the first book in Kingdom of Souls is very much focused on Ara's life and you know, the struggles that she's going through and like trying to save her kingdom, but from a very small level, because she's 16. She's not a politician. She doesn't want to be her mom's a politician, but she does not have the chops for it. And I don't want to give spoilers either, but like it kind of starts with this ideal, and then there are some things that happen that open at the very end of the book, really opens up a larger world of mostly around the Orishas and the gods and the mythology that we only get glimpse of in the first book. And so for book 2, I decided to kind of expand that whole mythology. It's like Well, and I'm never quite honest with the reader. I told you one thing in book 1, but you can scratch that because book 2 is going to tell you something completely different. But I like this whole ideal of you get this one point of view and you're so grounded in it, but it's one point of view, it's one opinion, it's one side of the story. And so for book 2, the way I expanded the world was giving other sides of the story that create what I hope creates a bigger picture of kind of what's going on, and also complicates things a little bit because it's like, oh, I was told this, but now I'm seeing something else. So then I think that's a kind of nice spot to put the reader in to kind of say like, okay, now you've given me a different opinion to follow.
I like related to that. I wanted to ask you how you approach writing like such a large cast of characters, and like when you're doing different point of views as well. I'm like, I don't think I've done enough with like different points of view where I'm not confident yet. I would love to do that, but I'm not quite confident yet to do that like with my books. But I wanted to know, like, pick your brain a little bit about how you approach doing that, because you have such a large cast of characters and each of them are so distinct.
So when the initial draft of Kingdom of Souls, I did try to do 2 points of views. I did Ara and Rajek, so that's her love interest, and it totally wasn't working. So, and I think that had a lot to do with they're almost being, it's that lens thing again. It was just too much going on and not enough initial focus on kind of the main core of the story. So for me, after I kind of got the original, like the core of the story and Ara on the page and kind of really narrowed down in on her journey, it was actually a little bit easier for me to build kind of the cast around her. And I really, what I like to do was kind of look at kind of where's their position in society and how would that impact their personalities and how would that impact their voice and their decision. So, you know, Ara is the daughter of a politician, but her father's not. She's not really involved with that. Her love interest is the son of a politician, but is basically on the path of becoming a politician. And from like this affluent family, so they're rich. And so it's a different kind of culture. And like, how would that affect his personality and who he is and the kind of ways that he would deal with kind of the trauma that happens in the book versus the way she would deal with the trauma. And I kind of do that for every single character. It's like, well, what is this person? It's hard, but it's possible. But what is this person kind of unique perspective? And the way it kind of, I think, works best for me is what is this person's agenda? What's their agency? Because their agency should be very separate and unique to them. It's not just there as support, as, you know, you're not just backdrop for the main character. Like, you have your own point of view and you have your own agency and your own wants and likes and dreams. And I try to think about that every time I'm writing, either from a secondary character point of view or writing a backup character, to make sure I'm always thinking about what is this person as a real fully 3D person, I guess you would say, really rounded person that isn't just in the service of the main character. And I think that's how I tend to write multiple point of views, is like, you're in service of yourself, not kind of the main character. So that means conflict. You're not always on the same page. There's secrets and lies and betrayals, I guess, that happen because of that. But it makes for interesting drama, right?
Yes, for sure. I love all the twists and turns in your books, specifically.
Look, and then I get myself in a situation where I'm coming up to book 3 and I'm like, well, I've done everything already, so what is this one gonna be about?
How far along are you on that?
I am currently in revision.
Okay.
So which is like a fun, almost done, but I like revisions. I actually am not a fan of first drafts because I feel like it's just literally word vomit on the page. And I'm just like, I'm just trying to get the story out. And when I revise, especially my first kind of like time through revising, I tend to rewrite the whole thing because I know like the first version just isn't working. So, that's where I am now, kind of rewriting and rethinking the bigger arc of the story. How about you? Where are you right now?
I'm also in revising. I have the first draft completely done, and like you said, it's just a bunch of word vomit. Like the way that I draft is, I outline thoroughly first, and then I follow my outline and I just spit out words until I'm done, basically. And then I go through and like you as well, I essentially rewrite the entire book much more slowly. Focusing more on like word choice and like what I want to accomplish with the scene, and things like focusing more on what I'm actually doing versus just throwing out the words to get the word count done.
I always kind of think of those first drafts as, you're trying to get the word count and you're kind of following your outline. Like I don't religiously follow my outline. I outline religiously, but then when I start to write, I definitely will make really random changes as I do that first draft, because I find like the first draft for me, it almost, even though it's very long still, it feels like a sketch or a long summary in a sense, than it is like really, like you said, getting into the details, really working at the scene level to bring out, what it is you're trying to do, whether that's tension or, like battle scenes or internal conflict and all of that stuff. So that's where we start to really dive into that stuff when we're revising.
Yes, I've always said that I prefer the revision process as well. But like now that I'm actually in the revision process, I'm like, I'll go back to drafting. I'll take that now.
So I feel like that is the writer's like problem. We will always say, yes, we love revision. Drafting's horrible. No, we want to go back to drafting. Oh, copy edits. I think that's just normal because there's so many rounds of things. And the one thing about the first draft is there's always only one first draft, right? Revisions could be multiple, will be multiple. Infinite number of revisions. So there's something that's just appealing about me. And back in the day when I was drafting, because it always feels like it was back in the day because revisions take forever. No, that totally makes sense. I feel like we're always like, the green is, the grass is greener on the other side when it comes to like whether we like drafting or revisions.
We'll find any reason to like not do our work. Like, I have to draft this new book right away.
Oh gosh, let's not even talk about that because I've got more of that to do. It looks like we also have some questions from the audience, so I actually want to dive into some of those as well, because you and I could probably talk forever and ever, especially about revisions. But let me kind of dive right into them. What are you reading or have read recently that you would recommend?
What did I just finish? I finished the audiobook of Rule of Wolves, which is the sequel to King of Scars. I don't feel like I need to even recommend that book because it's the Grishaverse and everybody loves the Grishaverse. I'm obsessed. But yes, it's like it is nonstop tension. I just read the book like in every single scene. I was just like, oh my god, what's gonna happen? But yeah, I think I finished it in like 2 days. I think.
I like the show, and I love the show as well. I don't know. Have you seen the series? I don't know. I was just like drooling, but that's okay.
Every single person in that show is like ridiculously attractive.
How is that possible? I'm sitting here like, well, how do you all look so good? No, it's like perfect. I am currently reading Beast of Prey. This is a debut that's out this fall, and I'm so excited about that one. I'm super, super excited. It is, and it's so hard it's one of those books that, again, is hard to talk about without giving it away. But I will will talk in themes. It is dark. It is literally about these teens who go into a forest, a jungle that is full of monsters, which is right down my alley because I like dark monsters.
Sounds fantastic.
Yes, and just literally kind of just to save their people, and I'm like, this is amazing, and it's kind of Pan-African, so it has a lot of African influences, and it is so richly written. The world building is just beautiful. So if you like books like Forest Stoves, then you need to be picking this up as well, because it's just on the same level of just like this beautiful deep world building. So I would recommend.
So like tiny like fun fact, like back in, I forget what it was now, 2018 maybe, or 2018 probably, I was doing a mentor thingy. Like I just put out a call on Twitter for like authors of color to send me like their pitches for their books, and I would read it and I would critique it, and like, you know, because I wanted to like offer something back to the community. So I did that, and Ayana was one of the people who submitted this book to me, and I read it, and like just the opening, I was just like, oh my god, this is so good. Like, you know, I definitely had her on my list of like the authors that I was gonna reach out to, and then she emailed and was just like, I was offered representation. Just like, yes, I knew it would happen.
Yes.
So it's like, it's so cool just to see, you know, how far the book has gone.
Yeah. And it's also cool to see that we're a small community. Like, I don't know that people realize that, but like a lot of us know each other and support kind of growing, especially other BIPOC, and like just helping them kind of grow. So I think that's amazing that you were doing that. Another question, is there a genre or age group that you haven't tackled that you'd like to one day? Good question.
I would like to write adult. I actually have an adult fantasy that I'm really, really excited to write. I hope I can get to it, but I feel like I'm not going to be able to get to it even this year because I have 2 other projects due. So it's probably not going to happen. But I'm so excited and I can't talk about it all. But but yeah, adult fantasy. Otherwise, I also have an adult sci-fi that is finished and that I need to rewrite actually for my agent. But yeah, I wanted to ask you, like, if you started writing middle grade or YA first, but you can, you know, we can add that later.
Yeah. So I do want to write adult as well, and I've got this. I want to actually not do a fantasy. There's an adult thriller ideal I have that I'm just so excited about, and it's so outside of my wheelhouse, but at the same time, I grew up on thrillers, so I feel like I could try to tackle one. But yeah,
I think you could do great.
Before I got like traditionally published, just when I was like in the trenches looking for an agent, I had written an adult book. Like, so it was one of the things I had to, that was like my first ever book that I written or manuscript, because it never got published. Was an adult thriller. So I feel like there's a little bit of circling back around to my roots of where I kind of started. And I'm really excited about it. I can't talk about it because it's like, I don't want to give away my ideas, but I'm really excited about it. But so I started there and then moved to YA and then also started writing middle grade. So I'd love to be prolific across all 3. That would be the dream for me.
Yeah, I agree.
Oh, I think we answered this one. So are you a plotter? Yeah.
We're both intense plotters, apparently.
I think so. I could not pants anything. I would seize up. I just like, how do you like write without like a plot? I know people do it, but I can't.
I'm so impressed by authors who can just begin writing and they have the structure of the book in their heads as they're writing. Do you know what I mean? Like, I have to outline it and be like, okay, here's my first act, here's my second act. At this point, I need to reach my climax, or whatever. And like, I know that sounds like super boring and like formulaic, but like it works. just for organization purposes, you know, before you start to outline it and then, you know, throw everything to the wind. But yeah, it's like authors who can just do this naturally, I'm so impressed because I cannot do that. Like my very first NaNoWriMo was back in 2010, 2011, and I pantsed that. And I was so burned out by the end of the month. I had written 50,000 words, but I was just like, I don't know what's happening next, but I'm just going to do this, I'm going to do this. And I was so burned out at the end. I was just like, that it took me 6 months to even go back to that manuscript and fix it. So that definitely taught me that I'm not a pantser by any means.
I just need a guide. That's all I'm asking for. Like, I just need something to help me get through to each scene, have those kind of the climax and all the important turns that you want to plan for. Like I said, though, like, yes, I'm very heavy on plotting, but I'm also not married to my plot or my outline. Like, I will change things. If I get to something, I'm like, that's not actually working how I think it's going to work. So I'm going to bag myself out of it and do something different. So while I do a lot of plotting, I do a lot of changing as well as I kind of go along, so that it's not like we're not. I think sometimes when people think, like, when we say we're like plotters, people are like, well, you're married to the outline and it has to be perfectly following.
I've heard the criticism that it takes out like the magic of the writing process, like having an outline takes out that, you know, creative imagination process, which I don't disagree, or I don't agree with at all, actually. But like you said, you know, like it's because we have a guide, but it's not like, it's not set in stone. It's not like you must write this or else, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Like the creativity, you can still deviate. You can do whatever. And as I'm outlining, I feel like the creativity process is still a huge part of the outline.
Yeah, for sure. So we have a question like, what inspired you to become an author? That's a good question.
What inspired me to become an author? Gosh, I don't know. I've wanted to be an author for as long as I can remember. You know, I grew up with like what's called the Danang, which is like monk oral folk tales, and they were filled with like ghosts and spirits and like, you know, just really usually really dark things, which is probably why I loved horror at that time in my life. As a little kid, I loved horror. And the very first stories I began writing were horror. So I don't know. I don't even know what it was. It's just the desire to be a part of those worlds. Maybe that's what it was. I wanted that magic to be real. The secondary, you know, like the secondary worlds, the magic, the imagination, things were just so mundane, I guess, in my world. And I think writing was probably my way of being able to participate in those worlds.
Yeah, I think that was also very true of me. And I started writing when I was very young. I know, like, you know, authors often talk about when they start writing, and I hear people said, well, I started as an adult or in college or at this age. I remember very much so being, you know, like at least like in middle school, thinking about and trying to write these little stories. And even before then, I mean, all kids have this, right? But like, I remember just having that vivid imagination and building these worlds in my head as I was playing. It's one of the first childhood memories I have. And they never went away. They only just intensified and got more complex and more elaborate as I got older. And then I realized, like, I actually love this. This is the thing I want to do. This is my passion. This is where I find my joy. And it just kind of developed and, you know, blossomed from there, of like being a kid who likes to tell themselves stories to wanting to write books. So it felt very natural to me. And I do remember very young telling my mom specifically, like, I want to be a writer. I don't know what that means really, but I want to do it. And then just obviously developing from there. But it really was something that was with me for since childhood, for sure.
Yeah.
So we have, and
Definitely.
I think, sorry.
Go ahead, no.
Because I can't see you when I pull up the questions and but I think we both kind of answered this a little bit, but it asked like what cultures and mythology inspired your magic system. Do you want to talk about that a little more?
I feel like we covered it. The mythology, the magical systems, and like the souls. Mm-hmm. Oh, I do want to say like the Deadwood. That was particularly inspired actually by, what is it called? The Dead Marshes from The Lord of the Rings. When Frodo and Sam have to cross through the marshes and Frodo gets pulled into the water by like the souls of the warriors who are trapped there. I was like, God, I love that. And also I love trees. So I was just like, naturally, it's going to be a tree.
Of course, of course. So there's another good question I want to hit, because I always love to hear this answer myself. But what was kind of the most like, what scene did you write that brought you kind of the most joy or fun? It's a hard question because we're so biased, but it's like so many.
Actually, I really enjoyed making the scenes in the Deadwood as like gruesome as possible.
I'm not surprised, Lori.
I feel like that's probably a throwback to like when I used to write horror as a kid. Mm-hmm. But I want it to be like straight horror, like when she's in those woods and like those bodies are coming out of those trees. But yeah, I wanted to be like, how can I make this even more horrific than it already is? And that was a lot of fun. So
look, I love all the dark scenes, so it's really like those are usually my favorite scenes as well. Because they're fun. There's something that's just nice about writing dark and knowing you're kind of putting all of that conflict and that tension in there and knowing how your readers are going to react to it. It's really weird because one of the things that I've had readers tell me is that my battle scenes are really good and that they're very detailed and like how do I make them work? And those are the hardest scenes for me to write in my story. And I spend so much time personally trying to act out what they're doing on the page.
I can see that actually, because your fight scenes are very cinematic. I feel like that's the word. They're cinematic.
Oh, thank you. But it really, but they're hard. And in the end, I feel a lot of like, I love them. They're fun in the end, but I definitely feel like I am always trying to find a balance of this is not just gruesome, because I like that, but also there's some depth to it. There's emotion, and there's like a deeper layer to it, and trying to find that balance. So they're hard for me to write, but at the end, I really do love kind of how they turned out. But I feel like those are the scenes I draft like over and over and over again before I can get them right.
The fight scenes are definitely ones that I save for like a next round. I'll like do like, the motions in the first draft. And then like the second draft, I have to be like, okay, now this fight scene has to make sense. So I have to like visualize it and go through and, do it that way. But yeah, it's definitely, fight scenes are definitely ones I save for like, the more detailed version of the draft.
So I feel like we're just the opposite. Like my first draft, the emotions are just like wood. I'm like, I don't know what they're thinking or they're feeling. They're thinking or feeling something. I'll figure that out later. So that's usually coming in my second draft where I'm kind of really thinking through about what their motivations are.
I like my first drafts, they definitely aren't as like, emotional as you said, but I do like to make clear, at least in the first draft, what emotion I'm trying to get across in this particular scene and like what I want the impact to be. And if I don't get it in that first draft, then I'll leave myself a note, and like tell myself what specifically needs to happen like emotionally in that scene. But yeah.
So are we at time? Looks like we're closing. I can't believe that's so fast. Oh gosh.
Wow.
I know
That
it's
did
been
go
an
very
hour. Isn't
quickly.
that insane? It doesn't feel like it's been an hour at all. But I want to thank Lori and Rena so much for joining us. Like, getting to hear you guys speak is an absolute joy, and like the world building and your worlds and everything, as much as I would not necessarily wish to live in them, I most assuredly, like, as a reader, I'm like, these are all of the things that I love. And I know that there's a lot of readers out there at the store who feel the exact same way. So I can't wait for everyone to get to dive into them. But thank you guys so much for joining us. Thank you to all of our amazing readers who joined us as well. Don't forget, everyone, you can find The Broken Web as well as Reaper of Souls, which are both book 2 in the series. You can find book 1 as well, and the other books as well at the link down below where it says purchase books. And you can actually get a signed and personalized book plate from Lori, which I forgot to say at the beginning. So that is a nice little treat that you will also get when you purchase your book. So on that note, have a lovely evening to everyone. Yes, Vanna White, the beautiful book.
Get it, go out and grab it. It's wonderful.
Go get Broken Web. And we'll see you all next time. Have a lovely evening.
Thank you so much.